please make sure that you put your questions in the Q&A box. Please note, if you don't have your name as your user ID, your questions will not be answered. Also, please note, there will only be enough time to answer 1 or 2 questions per individual. We're expecting quite a large crowd this evening. Thank you. Please stand by. started in just a few minutes, so please be patient. Anyone that puts a question in the Q&A must use their name as their log on, and Kashif will be available momentarily. Please stand by.
Good evening, everybody. How's it going? So we're right at 7 o'clock. So we'll give it a minute for everyone to join in, but I thought I'd pop in and say hi while everyone's joining. Here we go.
Yes, we still have quite a few people trying to get in, sir. So if we could give them a few minutes.
Yeah, we'll give them some time.
Thank you very much.
So what did everybody think about the elevator music?
Is bloody horrible a category, sir?
Oh, there was a teaser again. I was trying to stay awake with the music. It was a little too soothing. All right, we'll give it another minute.
Maybe you can let people know where they can get their copy of the book, sir, while we're waiting.
Sure. Yeah, if you want to dive deeper, I mean, obviously what we're doing here is trying to give you more insights from your report. And in the book, The DNA Way, I just laid out my personal story and how I used the same exact genetic information to deal with all of my chronic conditions and how I was feeling. So if you go to thednaway.com, you'll get a link to wherever you want to go, whether it's Amazon or Barnes and Noble, etc. Or you can just go directly to any of their sites. So wherever you typically go to get your books, whether it's audio or Kindle, whatever, it's all available and it's available everywhere. It's funny because I was in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago for this interview, and I had to meet somebody in a shopping mall who is in the biohacking industry who just said, let's meet while you're in town. And there was a Barnes and Noble. And he said, give me a second. And he went in and he bought the book and said, can you sign this? I was like, wait a second, what's this book? And I realized, oh yeah, we have a book. And it's kind of surreal when you see it, in person. So it's available everywhere. It's The DNA Way. Okay, we're almost
and if I could just have you do another 2 minutes, why don't you talk about Unpilled real quick?
Sure. Yeah, anyone that wants to dive deeper, I guess anyone that's been here for the past couple of calls, it's starting to see how we think about the body differently, right? And how we're not really trying to address symptoms. We believe that's too late and there's a lot more you can do, and that's too little to do. There's so much more that can be done if you dive into the biological systems that are failing. And so for our clients, this is not something we promote. You won't see this podcast advertised anywhere. It's a tool for you. So it's a tool for you, our customers who have their DNA data in hand that want to extend the value of that DNA data. There's many, many episodes now, 2 seasons full, from topics ranging from my fibromyalgia to hair loss to mold intolerance we just talked about, diet, ancestral diets, etc. You'll learn a lot. So go there. There's a new episode every week. Next season, we're going to have a heavy focus on female hormone health because it's so complex, so much is needed in terms of education, and it's such a big problem. So we're going to have a heavy focus there. But there's 2 seasons, again, like we said, of episodes there. So go in, have your DNA data in hand and learn and implement more. We want you to get as much value as you can and change your life as much as we can. And so that's where the podcast is there for.
Excellent. We are ready when you are, sir.
All right, let's get going, guys. Okay, so we're going to talk about, these are intertwined. So the reason why we put disease and aging together, so if you look at chronic disease and you look at our current, and I'm speaking in the context of North American healthcare, our killers, the top 15 killers in the United States healthcare system are all rooted in the exact same thing. It's one thing. They're just different manifestations of the same thing. And all of those things are inflammation. And to be a little bit more specific, 14 out of the 15 are inflammation. Number 3, the third cause of death, highest cause of death is actually medical error, which is a doctor making a mistake, which is also rooted in inflammation. You wouldn't have been there if you weren't sick to begin with. So the whole goal is, how do we not have inflammation? And this is why these are all intertwined, because the innate health of your cell determines whether you can get a chronic condition or not, at what pace you're aging, what your energy levels are, eventually things like hair, skin, libido, all of this stuff is intertwined. And so we put these together because they are really the same thing. So we're first going to look at, well, what causes inflammation? And once we understand that, here's how we think about disease. Here's inflammation, here's the trigger. This is the thing that is putting a load on my cells. To now understand what disease I'm going to get is a question of hardware failure. I may not be doing well with hormones. I may not be doing well with actual physical hardware like endothelial health. You may have seen in the reports, when it comes to brain health and plaque mobility. So once we teach you, that's the intention of these sessions, as we said in the last two, the intention is how to teach you to use this data so you can keep going. You shouldn't be limited to what we discuss here tonight. We're teaching you not only insights, but how to think so you can self-interpret and keep going. And this is how to think. Why do I get inflammation? What's the trigger? What's my weak link in this chain of all this biological process? What hardware is failing? What system is failing? And when you put those two together, what disease is that equal? And you'll see that this becomes pretty clear. So we're going to start by looking at the inflammation and immunity section of the report. And we're going to look at a couple of key cascades in there. And I call them cascades because singular genes, again, don't really tell you the full answer. You got to look at the cascade in the system. When we look at the glutathione process, you see the GST genes, GSTP1, GSTM1, GSTT1. Those 3 genes, and by the way, there's more genes involved in the glutathione process. These are the ones that we find are the most impactful. Part of our job is to eliminate the noise. There's 22,000 genes we could have potentially reported on, but we also know you don't have 22,000 days to invest into this and figure it all out. Part of our job and our expertise is to pull out what actually matters, which is going to drive the needle the most. And even though there are more glutathione genes, these are the 3 that you can push and have the biggest outcome from. And that's why we report on them. So we think of it in simple terms, and these genes do more than what I'm saying. But again, big ROI. What's the thing I can think about from these genes so that I really can push the needle in terms of outcome? GSTP1, think of it as first line of defense for the lungs. Everything that's inhalation based, mold, chemicals, pesticides, perfumes, etc. How efficiently do your lungs prevent all of what you just breathed in from entering your bloodstream? And if you have the AA version, you're doing a pretty good job. If you have the AG version, you're minus 40%. If you have the GG version, you're close to minus 60, in some people minus 70%. And so that airborne insult becomes a priority. We talked about this in the last 2 calls. What do I prioritize, right? It's not a prescription. This doesn't equal a problem where genetics isn't still stuck. It's more about prioritizing. Here's the biological function. I'm not at 0. I'm at minus 60, minus 70. So step 1, how well do I deal with airborne inhalation-based toxins and prevent them from entering my bloodstream? Step 2, GSTM1. And in GSTM1 and TT1, as you're going to see, we are looking for something very unique. And this is why our testing can sometimes take longer than a typical retail consumer test. And can potentially cost more than a typical consumer test, because we've also understood not only do we need to eliminate the noise and remove the genes that only give you a 2% outcome versus an 80% outcome, we also have to take those very important genes and dive deeper into what variants are possible. And in the GSTM1 and GSTT1, it's possible to have, instead of a SNP, which is in these thousands of letters that make up a gene, a spelling mistake, which is the AG or the GG or GG, spelling mistake in that location. It's possible to have what's called a copy number variation. How many copies of the gene did you get? Do you even have the gene? Forget about what SNP or what spelling mistake. What if it's missing and you didn't even get it from mom and dad? And that's possible. Or what if you got 1 copy? what is the implication if a spelling mistake means so much, right? So that's how we look at GSTT1 and GSTM1. And in other reports, you'll either see these two genes omitted because they don't also test. It's a whole other test you have to run for the copy number variations, or they assume it. They use like algorithm based on studies of when people have this gene, they usually have this one. And we find that that's about 60% accurate. So it's still not giving you what you needed. So in the GSTM1, if you're having 0 copies, you have 0 gut detox. If you have 1 copy, you're somewhat minus 50%. And if you have 2 copies, you're doing well. We're going to speak to that in a second. Now, GSTT1 is now second line of defense. Now that something got in, how well do I, in the bloodstream, clear it? And when you're looking at the GSTT1, you're looking for, again, how many number of copies. And if you have 2 copies, you're doing this job really well. And if you have 1 copy, you're like minus 50%. And if you have 0 copies, you're at 0%. You just don't do this job. There's no instruction for that biological process, and you don't deal well with glutathione in the bloodstream. So now what is the implication of these 3 things we talked about? When it comes to the airborne, what you have to consider is even if you have the best copy, your context has changed. You are wired for the best copy being a defense system for ancestral pollution, ancestral chemical loads, ancestral pesticide exposure, ancestral mold exposure. All of this stuff was fairly infrequent. It's now consistent and prolific. It is everywhere. Whether you're in your home breathing in chemicals or sleeping on your mattress, breathing in fire retardants, getting your dry cleaning home and putting it on and breathing in all that, or you're outside breathing the pollution, or in your garden breathing in the pesticide, it's a constant trickle of airborne inhalation-based toxins. So even if you have the best, you're not in the clear, it just means it's less of a priority. If you have 0, you know that here's where my problems are coming from. I don't do this job, or I should say instead of 0, the GG version, I don't do this job really well, so I have to prioritize and focus on that. It's no longer a choice or an option. When you're doing well, it's like, well, I don't really breathe that much. I kind of live out on the farm and I'm doing okay. Well, maybe there's some chemicals in the farm, so I got to deal with that. There's certain days where we're dealing with the chemicals, so I might take some detox supplements on that day, but other than that, I'm fine. Versus I had the GG. This is a daily protocol for me. Remove the insult and add some supplementation of salt to resolve the job. So that's kind of how you're looking at that. When it comes to GSTM1, we again have to think about it in today's context, which is if you have 0, we already know bad news. Just like myself, by the way, this is why I had eczema so bad and I had gut issues. I don't have this gene, missing, 0 copies. So when it came to going out to a restaurant with my business partner and him having no problem and me being bloated and getting a migraine, I truly believe that I had migraines because he didn't. So when the doctor told me it's a condition that you have, I believed him. What it was a different level of capacity to deal with that insult in the food. My partner, no problem, cleared it well. So now the total load, there would eventually be a point where he would have a problem, but I didn't clear it at all. So it led to the symptomatic expression almost immediately. So that's 0 copies. Minus 50%, funny thing is in today's context is actually where you want to be. If you are doing nothing, if you're not supplementing, if you're not doing much work to eliminate. Why? Because 2 copies, which is what we consider the best, I got it from mom and dad, so I have the full line of defense. In the context where food is so toxic, and you're constantly triggering a detox response, leads to autoimmunity. And there's some people that get stuck in the cycle of psoriasis and joint pains, and even beyond that, other autoimmune type, Hashimoto's, for example. Where is it coming from? What is the root? It could be this. It could be because you have 2 copies and you do this job so well in today's context, because food is so toxic, your body, like the cytokine storm in COVID, where your body is deploying these cytokines, trying to fight, but the trigger is so powerful, the catalyst is so powerful that you're overdoing the fight, right? Same thing is happening in your gut. So now all of a sudden the considerations are different. It's not so much about supporting the inflammation, it's about supporting or oppressing the autoimmune response, which means you're not putting the food in your gut. Detoxing it isn't going to support you. It's about not triggering it to begin with. You can't do much to reduce your good detox capacity. You don't want to go there. It's more about not triggering it constantly. Whereas on the other end, we have zero copies. You may still say, I want to go eat this nonsense food, but I'm just going to detoxify myself so well that it doesn't bother me so much. So the questions and the answers are slightly different in these two contexts. And this is why the middle ground for today's reality, we find seems to be where people have the best outcomes if they aren't careful with their food, meaning that they're loading themselves with toxic food. They don't detoxify so well. They are doing a decent job, but not so much where it hurts them. So it's kind of a weird level of interpretation to think about it in today's context. So now we move on to GSTT1, which is, it came in through here. It came in through here. Now what do I do? What is my body doing about this? GSTT1. If I have the 2 copies, great. If I have 1 copy, not so good. If I have 0 copies, all of this is a problem. It compounds the outcome of bad lung detox, bad gut detox. And now you can start to put these puzzle pieces together and understand this cascade, this baton pass between GSTP and GSTM to GSTT. Which link is broken? Potentially both. And then where do you intervene? And the one thing I would call out, if your GSTT1 is off, and you think glutathione pathway, it's not working so well, maybe I'm going to take some glutathione. If your GSTT1 is off and you're missing the genetic instruction and you add glutathione without being instructed on what to do, it ends up binding onto your minerals and your nutrients and things you actually need, and you're bedridden. I can't tell you how many times we've dealt with a naturopathic doctor, for example, who said, I don't get it. This person has toxins. I've done their blood work. There's inflammatory protein markers that point to toxins. I gave them liposomal glutathione, the great stuff, the good stuff, and they got worse. Do I need to give them more? And the answer was, this person is like somebody walking into a gym on day 1 and trying to bench press 400 pounds versus start with the bar, because you don't have the genetic instruction, or don't even use glutathione and use precursors, NAC, selenium. We make a product called Detox Optimizer. I think it's our bestseller. And in fact, I think it's out of stock right now because everybody always needs and wants it, which combines the right proportions of the precursors to manage exactly all of what we're talking about. And this is a type of product where even if you have the best genetics, in today's reality, if you're out there golfing and breathing pesticides, if you're out there in a city breathing in pollution, if you're out there in the farm breathing in all the chemicals that Monsanto supplied, then you may want to take some support, right? So that's how we think about the glutathione pathway. The outcome of all of this not being managed well, inflammation in the cell, right? And inflammation in the cell equals chronic disease, which we're going to talk about. Second, we take in toxins, we also make them. The SOD2 pathway, SOD2, which is also in your immunity and inflammation section, speaks to mitochondrial function. So when your cells take in oxygen and they take in nutrition to create energy, in that process, there's a byproduct that we call oxidation. Oxygen becomes oxidant. Thing that gives you life slowly takes your age away. It's the byproduct of breathing. We are meant to clear that oxidation from the cell. This happens at the mitochondria. So the mitochondria is sort of that furnace where this job happens. But if your furnace doesn't have a chimney, the smoke kind of piles up and makes you sick over time. It chokes and suffocates the cell, degrades it, damages the DNA. The cells sort of unravel, right? Then eventually you get to this point where you start aging. Or the cell is so burdened by this that it's much easier to get into an inflamed state and for disease to settle in. If the cell is resilient, then a viral infection doesn't mean much. Metabolic health issues are, not as prevalent. Chronic diseases just can't settle in because the cell is in a healthy state that doesn't allow the disease to settle in. So this is the second layer. How well do you deal with oxidation? If you have either the CT or TT version, you're at either minus 40% or minus 70% capacity to clear oxidation from the cell, which means oxidative stress, breathing in a lot of oxygen, running on a treadmill, if you're not sleeping properly, if you're doing high intensity type exercise, HIIT type training, that's oxidative stress, breathing heavy, right? Taking in too much versus weight training, resistance training, etc. You might be that person that just shouldn't step on a treadmill. Now, if you have the CC version, you may find that, yeah, I go for a run and I'm fine the next day. I recover. I don't need to sit on the couch and just deal with what I just did to my body because the efficiency is there to deal with the oxidation you caused. The other thing to consider here is that the GPX gene, which is a cofactor or co-star to this process, and it deals with hydrogen peroxide levels, which is the outcome and one of the final sort of outputs of this oxidation pathway. If they're not aligned, so it's an interesting phenomenon where we're not looking for good or bad GPX. We're looking for the GPX to mirror and match the SOD2. If your SOD2 is CC, best version, and your GPX is CC, best version, great. If your SOD2 is CC, best version, but your GPX is not, it's the hetero, which is the 2 letters, right? Different. Then all of a sudden, the pace at which they're doing their jobs is different, and there's some inefficiency. So what you're looking for is for them to be the same. And if they're not the same, that is going to be an additional burden to your mitochondrial health and your aging and your mitochondrial resilience and cellular health. And you need to put more of a priority and focus here and do more to support this. And what does that do more? First of all, this one thing, this one pathway, if this plus your glutathione pathway is off, I would highly, highly suggest you speak to someone on our coaching team because you're wired for chronic disease and rapid aging, especially given today's context. So if you're finding that there's parts of your glutathione pathway that are broken and your mitochondrial function is not the best, highly recommended that you work on a coach or go work with a coach, I would say, a functional genomics practitioner from Orion, because there's much more to consider than just what supplement do I take? Should I take the detox formula or not? When do I take it? This requires coaching beyond that. And if you know that you have the holes in the boat where the water is already coming in and all you're doing is shoveling the water out, it's an eternal fight versus plugging them. And that plugging can only happen if you know how and you know what to target. And the target isn't a pill, it's work, right? And this is why I'm saying coaching is the ideal scenario. If you're seeing exposure in both of these areas, highly, highly recommend. Tracy just dropped in there Jason's email. Talk to them because this is, again, a red flag for chronic disease of what nature, we don't know, but we're going to talk about today. Rapid aging, white hair, sagging skin, all the problems that you don't want to deal with, right? So just an aside, just for anyone that's seeing that in your report, highly recommended. So if your mitochondrial function is off, there's solutions out there. We make something called Mitochondrial Optimizer. It has some amazing ingredients like tocotrienols in it. There's coenzyme Q10. We use a very specific version called ubiquinol that comes from a company called Konica in Japan, who makes the best coenzyme Q10 that we could find. Bryce from our team actually flew out there and visited the facility and audited it before we ever started working with them. And it was incredible what we were able to find. But there's other products out there too. There's MitoPure. They use a compound called urolithin A, which is known to boost mitochondrial health. But there's things that you can do that are not taking a pill. There's things like sauna that support mitophagy, the development of new mitochondria. There's things like breath holding. If you were to literally focus on the ability to hold your breath for longer and longer and longer, all of a sudden your mitochondria start flourishing and have more vibrancy to them. And you have not only more mitochondria, but larger, more resilient mitochondria, which can handle a bigger load. And all of a sudden the inflammation isn't there. There's also things like resistance training, lifting. If you signal to your body, I need strength and youth, that's what your body will give you. So if you go lift heavy things, go do big dead presses, big squats, big bench presses, it's going to promote mitophagy, more mitochondrial resilience, youth in the cells. If you sit on a couch and relax, you're going to signal to your body, this is where we're at. Time to take it easy. And your body will take it easy. It's going to respond to the inputs you give it. This is what epigenetics is, by the way. your genes constantly expressing and responding to all of the inputs, your food, your smells, like everything around you that could potentially be a sensorial input, your genes are responding to, and then changing your outcome. So give it the right signal, which is I need youth, I'm lifting heavy things, right? That will support your mitochondria. There's a lot more we can go into, but again, there's more we have to talk about. So I'm going to leave that there, and just know that if you get an exposure in both, I recommend you work with somebody. So the other area to look at, we're going to dive more into this next week when we talk about hormones, particularly for women. Estrogen toxicity is a cofactor to all of this inflammation. And this is why women typically don't fare as well when it comes to the big chronic diseases. You know, when it comes to the cancers, and what is the number one cancer you can think of? It's usually breast cancer. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And there's a reason for that, because it is prolific and it is so preventable if you understood why it happened. Alzheimer's is so much worse for men. 80% of our dementia cases are in women. Cardiac disease, cardiovascular disease is so much worse for women. The numbers, so cardiac disease is considered to be a man's problem, right? That's the sort of, even in common sort of pop culture, but medically, that's what it is considered to be. And that's because men live with it for longer. 66% of women will die on their first cardiovascular event without even knowing that they were sick. There's no symptom. And so we're not treating it, because the majority of women will die when it happens, that first heart attack, because it's so severe, because of the cofactor of these hormone issues. And so we see it as a man's disease because men live with it. They keep it going. And so they're much more less likely to die on their first event. And so we're now going to dive into some of what we see there and help you think about your body. Now, when it comes to chronic disease, again, once we know here's the root of inflammation, and if I have some inflammation, what disease am I going to get? That disease Russian roulette. The big one, which affects the most people, cardiac disease, 50% of Americans are expected to die from. And by the way, most women that get breast cancer don't die from breast cancer. They die from cardiovascular disease, right? That inflammatory insult is triggering both. But the load, again, mitochondria is loaded by all of these multiple things, and the heart fails first. So the way we think about this, which will help you think about other diseases, is here's my heart. That's not where the disease happens. It's usually in the arteries. And the 9p21, if you're to look at that, we're going to move now to the cardiovascular report. If you're to look at the 9p21, you're going to see G, and you're going to see a number next to it. And what we're telling you is that there's 6 locations on the 9p21 gene locus where we're looking for this G marker that should have been an A. And depending how many G's you have out of these 6 locations tells us the quality of your hardware. Is it resilient, can take a pounding, or is it paper thin, highly prone to inflammation? The more G's you have, the worse. We very rarely see anyone with 0 or 1. We also consider it an extreme red flag when we see 6. Most people are falling around 3, 4, 5. This is why heart disease is so prevalent, because we are not wired for today's inflammatory environment. And this will fail first, because it is not your lungs, first line of defense. Breathe in toxic nonsense, it's a filter. You even have a GSTP1 gene that supports that filtration. Your gut as a filter. This internal cellular structure of the endothelium, of the breast tissue, of the brain, the areas where we see disease set in, were not designed for toxic insults. We have a blood-brain barrier that's meant to block toxins from entering the blood, or the brain, I should say, because it's not designed to cope with them. We have a gut barrier, which is designed to prevent toxins from going directly through the gut wall into the bloodstream. People with leaky gut, because of today's food and because of the toxicity and because of stress and other things, don't do that job so well anymore, and it goes right through this permeable gut wall. So again, going back to it, depending how many G's, 0 or 1, you are wired like Teflon stainless steel, very unlikely, even if you're doing some things wrong, to get endothelial inflammation, which then, by the way, your body responds to by deploying cholesterol to that location. The cholesterol then meets the toxicity, the free radical, whether it was the oxidation or the glutathione not catching another toxin, the oxidation that caused the inflammation in the first place also oxidizes the cholesterol that was now sent there to repair the damaged tissue, and that hardens and gets deposited. And now you have this buildup, and you start to get prescribed medication for something called cholesterolemia, because medicine is responding to what can be measured in the blood. Chemical medicine, measure a chemical, prescribe a chemical, versus biological medicine, which is let's look at your biological function, which is what we're doing here today, and prevent the disease or treat it at its root cause so you don't have it anymore. So that's what's going on, is bad hardware, incoming toxins leading to inflammation, and we know why you would have inflammation. We already covered that. Damaged tissue gets repaired with cholesterol. Cholesterol meets inflammatory insult, hardened, deposited, I now have a disease. Do that for long enough, and the disease goes beyond plaque to cardiac arrest. This is a 30-year journey you may go on. Cardiac disease didn't start the day you got sick. Cardiac disease probably started 30 years before that. A 15-year-old who is eating food today is deciding whether to get cardiac disease or not. It's to that degree. It takes a long time to develop, but once you get to 30, your mitochondria start depleting, your stem cells start depleting. Once you get to 50, your mitochondria fall off a cliff in terms of their number and quality and density, and all of a sudden the disease can settle in, because the same thing you were fighting for so many decades, your cells are no longer resilient enough to fight. Inflammation here, fight here, and the fight was kind of winning. Now all of a sudden, remove 4 or 5 soldiers from the cells, the resilience, the mitochondria, and now there isn't enough, and inflammation wins. That's what happens with age. That's why you're supporting the mitochondria, and that's why you're avoiding inflammation. So that's a profile for some people. And now you look at, well, what if I'm on a statin? You know, what if I want to just deal with the acute problem? Yes, you can. The SLC01B gene will actually tell you how efficiently you metabolize statins. And some people don't do that so well. And now all of a sudden, the standard dosage, you see a lot of people who get on a statin that have to come off because they have myopathy, muscle pain, even brain fog, you know, these inflammatory type issues that I feel bad, I can't take this medication. Because if you have the slow version of the gene, you metabolize it so slow that it's an overdose. And so we need to customize the dose for that person. And it's in your report. You have the ability now to go to your doctor, say, I'm a slow statin metabolizer, reduce the load for me. Then we look at PCSK9, which is also in your cardiovascular report. And the GG version points to, so what is that gene doing? There's one thing to reduce plaque, right? Inflammation, then the statin actually eliminating the plaque. We don't want that buildup, irrespective of the reason. We don't want it. So statins help reduce it. There's that acute emergency response, but for some people, statins don't work. Well, with the PCSK9 gene, what we see is that some people have a more efficient version of this gene. It does its job a little too well, which is a problem. Again, the good version of the gene isn't always the right answer. What does it do? So there's these receptors that bind the LDL, the cholesterol that you need in order for you to use it. And there's enzymes, proteins, etc., just like everywhere else in your body, that are deployed to break things down, to move on. This gene creates the ingredients to break the receptor down so that you don't have them. And if they're a fast version of it, you're breaking them down a little too fast. So now I have inflammation. Now my body's deploying cholesterol, and I no longer have the receptor sites to receive it and use it. And so now it's free flowing in the blood. And it's moving around. And when I go to the doctor to get tested, they say your cholesterol levels are high. But we gave you a statin. Maybe you need more. Or maybe you need a PCSK9 inhibitor. The statin isn't the solution. We can get personalized in terms of your medication. And this is where, again, me saying this generalized, first of all, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a clinician. This is an area where when you get into clinical matters, not only should you be working with a coach, but likely an MD, we can offer you on our end functional medicine doctor that can support that. This is not an area where you simply work with the nutritionist or coach, unless it's an education type thing, like teach me about how this all works, like we're doing here tonight. And I'm not speaking to any specific individual here. I'm just teaching you what we know. But as an individual who needs to work on a problem like this, for example, just yesterday, we were dealing with a gentleman who is in his 50s and has been on statins since his 30s. And he now has this elevated lipoprotein A. All of a sudden, it's shooting through the roof. And the plaque buildup is getting worse. He did a Doppler scan of his aortic. You can do like a bird's eye view scan of your aorta to show you how much plaque is building up, which is an indication of biological age, and he's not doing well there. It's like, I don't get it. I take my statin, I do everything right. His problem was exactly this. And so he needed a very different outcome, but this requires medical intervention. So I would recommend, again, Jason's email is there, reach out there. And this requires doctor's guidance. We cannot one-on-one give you medical advice, but a clinician can guide you and should guide you because it's a journey. It's not a one-time answer. You need support all the way through. So now the same thing is true of the brain. You see the APO3 gene in the same cardiovascular section. And the way we look at APO3 is you have this 3-3 version, which is the ideal version. And then you have a 4, that problematic number. You have 2, which is not as good as 3, but 4 is a problem. If you have a 3-4, we are told the medical literature says that you have an 8 to 10 times elevated chance of developing a cognitive decline disease like Alzheimer's or dementia. If you have a 4-4, we're told you have a 17 to 20 times chance of getting Alzheimer's or dementia. Meanwhile, there are people with these profiles walking around that have no Alzheimer's or dementia and died in their 80s without it. So what happened? If it's a genetic prescription for a problem, what happened? And just like cardiovascular disease, we do not believe it's a genetic prescription for a problem. That's where genetic science has gotten things wrong. We do understand that geneticists think disease-centric, like looking for the pill. We're not looking for the pill. We're looking for root cause. And so what's going on here? If your ApoE3 is off, essentially we're saying your body does not transport lipids around your system so well. So the movement, that HDL, LDL switch doesn't happen well for you. The taxi cabs are really inefficient. And so if you have inflammation and you're transporting cholesterol to support the inflammation, it's not going to get moved so efficiently, which means some of it gets left behind, right? None of this happens unless you have inflammation. Unless you have inflammation in the brain from insulin response, which you can look up in the report, and we talked about that last week, insulin response, from a poor gut environment, which means causing gut dysbiosis because you know your GSTM1 is off and either triggering autoimmunity or triggering inflammation, and all of a sudden you're chipping away at that gut wall, making yourself sick. It could be from female toxic hormones, which we're going to talk about next week. It could be inhalation based. It could be what you're breathing. In fact, I interviewed a gentleman named Tom O'Brien, who's an amazing functional medicine doctor. He's actually, I don't know if he still is, but he was on the board of the Institute for Functional Medicine. So an influential person in the space as well. And he said, according to his research, 60% plus of today's Alzheimer's and dementia is inhalation based, what we're breathing. Why? Because we're living longer. We are living longer than our ancestors. We're not living healthy, but we're living longer. And so our brains are just around for longer to be exposed to more. And when I say more, I truly mean more, because there is more than ever before to be exposed to. Try driving in LA. Try running in New York. Try living on your farm and competing with the other farmers, meaning you're using all the chemicals. Try living in a suburb and keeping up with the Joneses with your lawn and all the glyphosate you're spraying. So all of these things are threats. Try living in Austin and not having a house with mold. Very unlikely. Almost every house does. So all of these toxin threats that are inhalation-based, another source. So we first have to identify what is that gaping hole in my genome, the hole in the boat that's letting the water in, which eventually will break the wood. And then I'm trying to repair the wood. That's the plaque. That's the Alzheimer's. And instead of just block the hole so there's no inflammation, which means Alzheimer's and dementia can't happen. It's either amyloid plaque built up in the brain, which is a response to inflammation and poor lipid transport, the ApoE, or it's brain cell death. So constant triggering, whether it's what you're breathing, eating, etc., killing brain cells and dying off of brain cells, leading to eventual dementia. So these are the considerations to make when you're looking at chronic disease. Same thing with diabetes. We looked at the AMY1 gene last week, and we looked at the TCF7L2 gene, which determines your insulin response. And if you're not doing well with TCF7L2, and your diet isn't aligned to that, and you're constantly triggering an insulin response, you're going to create a different load on your cells, metabolic poor health. Today, the CDC's, the Center for Disease Control, says that only 5% of Americans are metabolically healthy. I think there's something like 38 million diabetics in the US today. We have close to 90 million pre-diabetics. They're one step away from being diagnosed. And that takes up, a good third or more of the population. And the majority beyond that are still metabolically unhealthy, which is why you had this phenomenon of something like COVID being so much more deadly in the United States. India had way more cases, but far less death. Why? Because the people eat clean and had metabolic health. So the cells were resilient and able to fight. They did not get burdened to the degree of somebody that's in poor metabolic health. And this is why you see even a lot of athletes. You saw these weightlifters. There was this phenomenon of weightlifters who were in the best shape physically and outwardly. But if you look at what it takes to maintain that, the food that's eaten, which is protein, but it's usually cheating with shakes and sucralose and aspartame. And, so the metabolic health is not necessarily there. And these people got hit fairly hard. So these are the things to look out for is inflammation. And we know why. It's my cells dealing with glutathione, dealing with oxidation. It's oxidation that's, we just talked about that as another outcome, which then leads to poor cellular health. Then it's metabolic health. What are the things that lead to poor metabolic processes, which have a similar effect to the cell as inflammation? It starts struggling and it's not thriving anymore, and it loses its resilience. And so that disease that's been knocking on the door for 20 years that couldn't get in has a wide open loading dock to just throw itself onto the floor and make you sick. And this is how you have to think about these things, all preventable, and in some cases reversible if you already have them. So now we're going to walk down the path of methylation, because if you do have inflammation, how is your body dealing with that? And this is why we call it phase 2 detox. There's phase 1, which is how do I clear, bind, and get rid of? And there's a second line of defense called phase 2 detox, which is your methylation. And we're going to dive a little bit into what that looks like. So what is methylation? There's 3 definitions. The simplest for you to apply is anti-inflammatory response. If I know there's a gaping hole that's going to cause inflammation, if I know there's a hardware failure that's going to lead to disease, how well do I fight inflammation? And if I don't do that well, there's another area where I need to prioritize, focus, and add, whether it's supplements or foods, and remove environmental threats or whatever it may be. The second layer to methylation, so 1 is anti-inflammatory response in a nutshell, that's the outcome. Second is creating what we call a water-soluble methyl group. So picture a toxin that is not water-soluble, so it's difficult for your body to pee or poop it out, and it gets stuck, which causes the inflammation, which is why we're saying it's an anti-inflammatory tool. Your body then can send a methyl group, so something is deployed, binds and connects itself to that toxin and makes it water-soluble. And now you can poop it out, and you can clear it, and the inflammation, which was the outcome of it staying, starts to teeter and go away. The third answer to what is methylation, it's the management of your gene expression. So earlier on, we said that your genes are constantly expressing over either upregulating or downregulating in response to stimulus. So everything is constantly triggering a response. what you smell, what you eat, what you breathe, the stressors, your shift in your position from sitting to standing. Stand up and your genes will change their expression because your body's going to get ready for that movement. The efficiency by which your genes express is dictated by your methylation. So your response to whatever those threats are, how quickly do you get in gear to respond? Some of us don't do that so well. And so when you walk into a factory and you have the bad GSTP1, so airborne toxins get in, and you feel a little bit of brain fog and a little bit of headache, and it hits you fairly hard and it lasts the rest of the day because your methylation is off and you're also not responding efficiently. The body goes into more of a, a whirlwind of just dealing with the pain as opposed to expressing to upregulate the genes that will then resolve the problem. And you no longer have that ability. So let's look at the genes in methylation and understand where you may be having a red flag. So FUT2 is the first gene we look at. In fact, I'm looking at it clinically. Let's look at it the way you see in the report. MTHFR. This is the big star for methylation, and it's what's most spoken of, only because it's the most studied, and because pharma research assumed that you isolate a gene and you isolated the problem. But no, more than any other system, it's important to look at methylation as a true cascade. Here's this chain with various links. And if one link is broken, it doesn't mean the chain is broken. And if 5 links are broken and 1 link is doing well, it doesn't mean the link is doing well. If you only look at this one link, and this is what we do clinically, is we just look at MTHFR and we make a call. And often people get worse after the call is made. So what is the call? You need some methylfolate. Now, it's absolutely true that our food is deplete of folate. We don't have enough. This is why our bread is so unhealthy. The bran has been removed, the nutrient value, it's just starch and sugar essentially. The folate is not there. And so our food is supplemented with folic acid, thinking that this will do the job of replacing folate, but it doesn't. Why? Because folate automatically gets to work, and folic acid needs micronutrients to signal it to get to work. So instead of this automatic job that's just happening, instead it only happens if the conditions are perfect. In order to know the conditions, you have to look at the rest of the cascade. So MTHFR, it may be off, which means you don't deal with methylation well, but you still don't know what to do about it. We then look at SHMT1. If you're a GG, you're doing really well, and go ahead and take that methylfolate. Go ahead and take that folic acid. If you're AA, you need something called folinic acid. You don't metabolize folic acid so well, and all those foods that have been fortified with folic acid, thinking that they're going to give you the folate you need, aren't working for you. And what does folate equal? Hair health, skin health, nail health, internal anti-inflammatory process, cellular resiliency. It deals with everything. And so if you don't have enough, because you're relying on them, when I say relying, most people don't even know that this is a question they should ask. Folate, folic acid, etc. But it's already been done for us in our food supply. We know we need folate. We know we don't have it because the raw food stuff, the grains, etc., have been broken down and genetically altered, so they don't deliver it anymore. And so our foods have been quote unquote fortified with folic acid, but some of us don't deal with that so well. So SHMT1, if you're AG or AA, it's not working for you, and you're going to need folinic acid. If you're MTR or MTRR has either an AG or a GG, then you're going to need a very specific version of B12 called adenosine. Adenosine is not the common version, highly uncommon. We sell it. If you want, go to our website, it's available. Typically what you get is methylcobalamin, because again, the assumption is your methylation is good. So you can use that methylcobalamin. But if your MTR and MTRR is off, your methylation is not good. And this specific link is broken down. And so you need to respond by providing your body adenosine B12. If your FUT2 gene is off, FUT2, you also need to consider that your gut is not designed to absorb some of the micro B vitamins that are so important to support methylation. and to support anti-inflammatory response. And so you need it sublingual under the tongue. This is why we make our B12 sublingual adenosine, because it just works for everybody, as opposed to the methylcobalamin in the store shelves, which only works on some people. But the thinking is, again, very linear. Methylation is broken, let me give you a methylated product. But that's not how everybody's body works. So again, methylation is a rabbit hole that we can spend an hour on its own, and is an area where we resolve a lot of conditions. It's an area where, again, if you were to work with a functional genomics practitioner, they could really dive deep into this cascade for you. And because there's so many genes and it's so multifactorial, everybody's story is different, right? Everyone has their unique story, and the solution is very different. So this is an area where if you really want that white glove, personalized, figure me out, I would recommend you work with a functional genomics coach, because your methylation is one of the big keys to aging, to energy, to libido, to hair, to skin, to reducing inflammation, to not developing a chronic disease, to feeling good today. All of those considerations, if your methylation is off, none of these things are working well, right? It's a key biological function that is attached to all of these outcomes that you're seeking. So if you want to dive deeper into it, highly recommend a coaching program. So now all of what we talked about also relates back to aging. And why did I want to cover like this as opposed to like, let's talk about aging, let's talk about disease? Because you start to understand by now, I'm hoping, that they're all the same thing. They are all not understanding what it takes to maintain my cells in their state, that the God-given gift that I was born with, of these youthful, energetic, mitochondrial dense, resilient cells. I have to make choices to reverse that. I have to make choices to have my mitochondria shrink and die off, to have my cells be inflamed, to cause oxidation. So all of these are driven by choices that, and for the most part, completely unintentional. We don't know that we're doing these things to ourselves. So now if you are in that boat and you are doing things yourself, not knowing how your body works, the outcome is poor. If the cells are burdened with inflammation, you're going to see the outward evidence of that. The hair is going to start to turn white. The skin is going to start to wrinkle and degrade. Your body, everything will start to sag. The muscle mass is not the same. So your body will give you the age you're demanding from it. And also your body will give you the age that your habits are creating. So if your habits are not aligned to your genome, especially the red flags in your genome, to be more specific, then do expect, well, here's me and my twin sister, but we don't look the same, because your habits are not the same. And we've seen this over and over and over again, where we've actually worked on twins and families, and you see different outcome based on variable inputs, the habits. So know that your pace at which you age, the choice to get your ancestors' chronic disease, cardiovascular disease runs in my family, diabetes runs in my family. Do you want that to continue? We talk about in terms of wealth, breaking that ancestral, where people get stuck in a certain socioeconomic level and breaking that. It's the same thing with health, changing the thinking around what health actually means, as opposed to waiting to see if you get it and then treating it. Well, let's just not get it. Let's understand why it happens and not get it. Or if I have it, let's work on reversing it as opposed to treating it. Let the doctor have their acute response, because I don't want myself to get so sick that something problematic happens beyond that, because these problems equal more problems if you don't deal with them. Let them have that acute response, but at the same time, I'm going to put out the fire, and eventually my doctor is going to say, I don't know what you did, but keep doing it, right? Whatever you're doing, it's working. And you do get those answers after a while, because it's undeniable when numbers go down, when the cholesterol markers are just not there anymore, and you don't need the statin anymore. And we've done this before. So with that all being said, Just because there's so many questions, we normally go to 8 with a presentation, but I'm going to start a little bit earlier just to give you extra time because I see a lot of questions here already. I'm going to go open the Q&A box. And we will start with Stacy's question, who was here at 6:58 and already dropped her question in, making sure that she would get the first answer. And that's amazing. So Stacy's asking about AFib, cardiovascular condition. Her nitric oxide delivery is not the best. Methylation is not the best. Oxidation, not the best. Glutathione, and poor vitamin D. So this exact example, Stacy, is where I was saying, when you have multiple areas of cascades that are failing, the answer and support is so multifactorial that it requires support, right? It requires coaching support. It requires working with somebody that has both the medical knowledge and the functional genomics knowledge to personalize the medical protocol. So I can give you basic answers here now, but I would highly recommend you don't action them until you've dealt with somebody hands-on, because what you're describing, there's all these things you're dealing with, and turn a dial here and it affects a dial here. Turn a dial here and all of a sudden there's a new dial to deal with in the middle. So you need that oversight where the algorithm running in somebody's mind can catch all of what may happen, because we've seen these patterns before. So really, I would say, so first of all, yes, we're not saying that your AFib was caused by all of this, but we're saying that the degree to which it's expressing itself is highly variable based on how healthy the terrain is. And if you have really good terrain, just like we said about COVID, the same exact viral insult can have a very different outcome if your cells are healthy, right? If your cells are healthy, then all of a sudden you do fight back. You know, that AFib is not signaled and triggered all the time. But if the terrain is horrible, then that AFib is going to be equally horrible. So it's very important to sort of get yourself to a homeostatic state where the body is where it's meant to be. Again, that what we were born with, what did 19 feel like, and bring that back. Now, where specifically to intervene without looking at your data, it's tricky, but I would say that the first thing you want to do, the acute response, is to deal with the inflammation in the endothelium. There's supplements that deal with that. You want to then turn off the tap. So there's the reservoir, which is how sick are you, and there's a tap, which is the insult that keeps coming in. And you kind of want to deal with both, and that's your root cause. Whether the AFib corrects itself or not is hard to predict. A doctor on our side may be willing to make that call, but what we can tell you is the outcome of it. How big? How is it a 2 out of 10 problem or a 9 out of 10 problem? That becomes your choice, right? Tomorrow, I see, can anything be done about osteoarthritis? Yes. Anything that's an itis means inflammation, right? So anything that's inflammation is preventable and reversible. Osteoarthritis, excuse me, is a combination of poor cellular health and bad hardware. So it could be rooted in vitamin D response. Look at your vitamin D response. It could be rooted in poor metabolic health, which is often likely the case. You know, osteoarthritis is often rooted in my diet is not aligned to my genome, and I'm in very bad metabolic health. And eventually, at a certain age, that equals a chronic disease, and osteoarthritis is one of them. But I would really recommend you dive into the vitamin D pathway. And when joints are swollen and crooked, like you're saying, it just, again, it's an 8 out of 10 problem as opposed to a 2 out of 10. So let's get that down to a 2 out of 10. Let's get rid of the inflammation. Let's do that. And it is very, very possible. Let's deal with the vitamin D levels. Let's deal with the antioxidant level. Let's deal with the glutathione levels and get your body to that homeostatic place. It is highly, highly possible. And if you want to work with somebody as a coach on that, they can probably dive into your genome and help you. But on your own, focus on your vitamin D pathway, antioxidation, and glutathione pathways, and figure out what to support. Cheng is saying my cardio genes say my likelihood of high cholesterol is considerably low, but I've always had high cholesterol no matter what I do. How do you explain that? So without looking at your report, it could mean a couple of things. that your body is having a lot of inflammation. So you're likely to develop low. You're likely to have low cholesterol levels given a normal input. There may be something you're doing that is highly inflammatory in nature, which is causing this elevated number. So it could be something you're breathing, eating, etc., that is habitual and consistent that could be triggering this. The other thing that's happening is it could be your ApoE. So look at your ApoE, and if that is a 3-4 or a 4-4, then your body just doesn't transport lipids efficiently. So the overall level is not high, but where it's showing up in the blood, that's not normal. So remember, the interpretation, there's a number that's high. You have high cholesterol because we measure how much is in the blood. But is your total overall amount of cholesterol in your body higher than it should be? Or is it just showing up in the blood and being able to be measured because your ApoE is off? And we find often people with the ApoE that's off, that their cholesterol numbers always show up high simply because they're not transporting efficiently. So there's many ways to look at that, and there's likely a very solid reason. Is there an LPA gene? So it's more the PCSK9 gene. So look at PCSK9, and you'll see how efficiently you bind cholesterol and how rapidly you eliminate the binders themselves, the receptors. That speaks to elevated LPA. Julie is asking what report is he in? Sorry, we missed that. That was at 7:13. And you will get, by the way, if you miss anything or if it was hard to follow, you'll get a replay. And we were looking at anti-inflammatory. We started at glutathione, then we went to antioxidation, then we went to methylation, and we kind of went in that order. Agnes, is GG the worst GSTP1? Yes, correct. You got it. And AA is the best version. Kathy's asking, what if you have 0 GSTT1 and 2 GSTP1 that seems to be counter? It's not that they counteract each other. It's that there's different jobs they're doing. So yes, your 2 GSTM1 is to some degree supporting the 0. So there's one soldier over here that doesn't do their job, and this other soldier there is doing a really good job. So that may balance things off a little bit. But the bigger question is, where is the balance happening? You do a really good job of gut detox, and you do 0 job of blood detox. So once it's in, so for you, exposure is the question. You don't want it getting in, because once it's in, your blood isn't cleared, and you need to constantly support the detoxification of your blood with precursors, not glutathione itself, unless you start low and build it up. You can't, right? You're looking at supporting with precursors. You're looking at eliminating toxic foods that might lead to autoimmunity. And yes, a good GSTM1 to some degree balances off the bad GSTT1, but not enough to make up for it. Ching is asking how you tax hydrogen peroxide. That's done through a clinician. I haven't seen a consumer hydrogen peroxide test. And you'll have to, we can do it for you if you work with one of our clinicians. We can contact a lab. Your doctor can do it. They may ask why you don't need this. Point to your mitochondrial function in your genetic report, and that will show them why. So your recommendation is auto work with a clinician, SOD2. Yeah, if your SOD2, this goes back to what we said, Maria, where if your SOD2 is okay, but your GPX is operating at a different level of efficiency, then they're not aligned. And there's a lot of problems that can come out of that, which point to cellular degradation, aging, hair and skin aging, inflammation, free radical activity that can lead to inflammation in the endothelial, depending what quality of endothelium you have. So yeah, if you truly want your genetic playbook and just not to have any of the problems I'm talking about, the fast track is, like you said, to work with a clinician and help allow them to dive deep, because it's not as simple as this gene means this, let's go do this. They have to look at other systems, hormones, your diet, etc., like what's all going on. So yeah, if it's within your means, highly recommend working with somebody. Lisa's asking, thank you, Kasha, you're very welcome. I'm wondering about, same question about 0 GST1 and 2. Oh, it's actually the opposite, 0 GST1 and 2 GSTT. So what's the implication with mRNA? And I'm just going to keep reading. It's a longer one. Particularly for neuromodulators. Yeah. So yes, we have seen. So what is the question when it comes to the vaccine? It is the spike protein that's toxic in relation to this question. So somebody that has 2 copies of the GST1 gene is probably doing a decent job clearing that spike protein. But because it's such a powerful input, it's a condensed input, it's beyond your capacity to clear. So even people with the best detox still will get some degree of inflammation, some deposits. They might get swollen lymph nodes because the spike protein builds up when you're trying to clear them, etc. So you do want to get into a clearance protocol. Dr. Burkle on our end does a really good job of this. If you want to work with a clinician, whether it's a couple calls or a deep program, he can work with you. He spent a lot of time focusing specifically on COVID long haul and vax injury, and he has a lot of knowledge there. So if you want to work with him there, you can. And in terms of neuromodulators, long term, what we're seeing. So first of all, there's no bigger problem with trial and error in medical use and in drug use than there is in mental health and neuromodulators and antidepressants and SSRIs and all of these things that we take for our brain. There's no bigger source of trial and error. And we are actually going to be launching a pharmacogenetics panel to solve this problem. And it's going to speak to how exactly your body metabolizes any one of these molecules, including all these neuromodulators, and what is right for you, dosage, version, brand, literally, if we're able to do that. It's coming out in the next little while, I think in the next couple months, and it'll be able to answer this question with precision. Anyone who's been tested in the last sort of few months, we may be able to run it for you. Some of you may have to be retested. But when I say run it for you, it just means lesser cost. There will be a cost to getting it because we're running a new test, but that will answer this question a lot. For Anne, can inflammation be measured by blood? Yes, C-reactive protein is a great indicator of inflammation. Yes, you're doing well if your C-reactive protein is low. 8-OHDG is another good indicator. Measuring biological age, like we have a new product called TrueAge, called DNAging. TrueAge was a research partner that we had, which a lot of you have seen on our website, and we wanted to come in with more data at a lower cost with something that's easier to use. So we built our own, and it's called DNAging, and it's another incredible marker, not for the inflammation itself, but how much damage is done. And if you're able to measure your biological age, you know that your habits have not been aligned if it's too high, and you know your habits are amazing and perfectly aligned to your genome if it's too low, right? So this is why we brought this test out. We want you to think about your body genetically at the hardware level, at the innate wiring level. And so we created DNAging to also answer these questions at that level, as opposed to let's measure a protein, which is a reaction to inflammation. But like Anne is saying, she's still not clear on where she's at. Versus with a high level of clarity, here's your immune response, here's your inflammatory response, and here's how old you are on the inside. Let's get to work. So we've launched now DNAging. If on our side, if anyone needs more, maybe we'll drop a link in terms of someone you can talk to or a way that you can order it. But it's a great way to know where you're at. Julia, we missed you on what is the bad version of the gene. So obviously that was during the call. We don't know what that was. So Tracy's 54. Let's see. She's heard that statins. Is it true that statins are more effective after a cardiac event? Okay. So there's 2 answers there. One is what we talked about with the PCSK9. GG is the bad version you're looking for. right? So that could be your answer, because again, they're measuring levels in the blood. They're not measuring utilization. They're not measuring why. The important other thing for you to look at is plaque buildup. That's an important part of the puzzle, because if there's no plaque, you don't actually have a cardiovascular disease, right? If it's in the blood, it's lack of receptor activity. It could be elevated levels because of your ApoE. It could be too much inflammation, but your body is actually doing a really good job utilizing that cholesterol because there's no plaque buildup. So one thing I would do is is go test for plaque, right? That's going to signal, is this a cholesterol number or is it actual cardiovascular disease? Is it building up? And then if it is, you need to know why. Is it oxidation, oxidating the cholesterol? Is it poor transport or ApoE? Is it high level of inflammation because of my 9p21, meaning that I get inflammation fast? And just because mom and dad had amazing genes there, again, they may have had one bad location too, and you may have got the bad ones from both of them, right? So those are the areas where I would say you would look to dive deeper. Agnes is asking, how does caffeine affect inflammation? So it is inflammatory in nature, especially if it's constant and ongoing. It also drives your adrenal response.
It appears that the webinar is frozen. Stand by, please. Okay, Cash, you're back.
Okay. All right, sorry guys. So I was answering a question on PCSK9. Gigi, we already answered that. And I think I was answering another question, but I think I was at the tail end of it. So Katie, SLC01B1 is how efficiently you metabolize statins, which will help your doctor understand how to dose you. PCSK9 is how efficiently you clear the receptors to bind cholesterol, and that good efficiency is actually bad news because it means you're not using it, you're gonna have an elevated level in your blood, which is a different problem to solve. What if we don't have anything above ApoE2, number 3 or 4? ApoA2 is your fat metabolic gene. ApoE is what we're looking for. So ApoE, APOE, which is in the cardiovascular section. That's what you're looking for, not ApoE2, which is your fat metabolism. Agnes, what is the best air purifier? There's actually an amazing company that I met during COVID times who was clinically tested to kill COVID on contact. That's how powerful it was. And it's actually used by food processors to make sure that there's zero pollutants in the air. And they now have built an at-home version. I apologize, the name escapes me because I haven't spoken to them for some time. But if you send a note to client care or anyone else on our team saying that Kashif promised he was going to tell me the name of that air purifying company, I will look it up and find it. I do have it. I just don't remember it. So we do know the name of the company, and they do have an at-home unit now. It's incredible. It's truly designed to just kill everything in the room. Now, this is about, not so much about purifying pollutants, more about killing the viruses and bacteria, et cetera, that are in the room. Now, it comes to filtering, I don't have an answer there. I don't know the best answer, but I can tell you we do partner with a lot of amazing products, so we may be able to find that answer for you, especially stuff from the biohacking world. So I would send the question, someone on our team may know. ApoE, yes, you're correct, Cheng, it's the ApoE gene. There should be either a 2 or a 3 or a 4 and 2 numbers next to it. So that's what we're looking for. ApoE3 or ApoE33, 34, 44, 23, 33. So there should be some set of numbers next to it, which will tell you what version you have. Lisa, what are the best tools to fight inflammation other than food? Is medicine, sauna, breathwork, yoga, reducing stress? What about living in the city? All of what you just said, all of that stuff. Fighting inflammation in today's reality is doing everything all the time because there's so many threats all the time. right? So keep the solutions of pre-1970s are not relevant to today anymore, but we're still using that science, right? So the solutions that your thinking around supplementation cannot be, it's a supplement. It's something that I add. It's a must. It is a replacement of poor biological function for today's context. So everything you're saying, right? All of it. And breath work, yes, example, etc. Sauna, I would say, is one of the most potent detoxifiers. Alzheimer's going down 35%. Cardiovascular disease is like minus 50% if you're doing it more than 3 times a week. Supplementation is important and key. NAC, glycine. We make a product called Detox Optimizer. Supporting mitochondrial function is another part of detoxifying, because if your cells aren't thriving, the outcome of the toxicity of the inflammation is just more prevalent. And the last thing I would say is minerals. Minerals are beyond nutrition. They are also detoxifying agents. So they go into your cells with a charge, drawing antioxidants in, and they come out of your cells with a charge, pulling toxins out. So making sure you're supplementing with minerals, because our food doesn't have enough. Paulie saying, does it have any effect on histamine tolerance of mast cell? Yeah, so there's a few things to consider for histamine and mast cell. Yes, exactly. All of these inflammatory pathways that make this so much worse, right? So the mast cell activation, we've actually worked with a mast cell class to make to reinterpret this for that context. If you want to be part of that master class, again, I would say send a note to client care. There is a cost because we're working with a partner. So there's a cost to attend that master class. But it is a deep dive master class on mast cell activation and what your genome can inform. It's hours, so it's not like a 30-second response here. It's hours. It's a long answer. But it is all of what we've been talking about. Reducing the toxic load, knowing what to prioritize. What for me is the toxic load? What's my red flag? What's that gaping hole in my genome that will allow the toxin in? It's the anti-inflammatory response, methylation. What am I doing? All of those things will, why is mast cell also variable in outcome? Because all of these things are variable. So you can send a note to client care if you want to join the master class, or just consider what I just said, that all of these things will change the outcome. So your B12, okay, so B12 level is high. I don't take any. That is diet, or that could be metabolic pathway. So there's a difference between levels and utilization. It needs to get in the cell, right? So if you have the FUTGG, take a look at that. Then you might need to be taking a sublingual. Maybe what you're getting from your food isn't actually being transported and used by the cell. This is a big consideration. So we've seen this before, where people have elevated B12 levels, but intracellular, it's not the best. And so look at your FUT2, and you might need to consider a sublingual. Adriana, I use hydroxycobalamin instead of adenosine. Yeah, it's better than the methylated version. So you're eliminating that methyl threat, which can give you like a headache or brain fog, but it's maybe not as efficient as the adenosine. Kathy, do you offer B12? Yes, it's on the website. It's a sublingual adenosine. Jill, I've been looking for a sublingual methylation product that is a sublingual methylation product. I haven't seen one. What you could do, I've seen nothing that's been formulated as a straight out methylation product, meaning there's a full formulation. But what is methylation? It's your B complex, so it's B12, B6, B9, folate, folinic acid. According to your report, you'll know what version of you need of each. So those I've seen sublingual versions of, right? And you might need to buy multiple products if that's what you're looking for. So just break down exactly which micronutrients, sorry, I should say, B6, folate, B9, folic acid, like so you can get those from something. I haven't seen a methyl support formula. That's sublingual. What would happen if I use folic acid instead of folinic? You'll just get over methylated. And what that means is, minor brain fog, headache, joint pain, you're feeling off, mood, malaise. So you're over methylated. Your genes are overexpressing and the jobs are happening a little too much. It's going to burden you. And you'll know that if you take a methylated product and you don't feel right, that it's not right for you. Is a good form of folic acid, calcium, so really what you're looking for is folate, right? Folate is what's missing from our food, which you can get from B6. So really, I guess the straight answer to this is if you can get a B6, it's better than anything, right? Folic acid is a replacement to folate, and it's been the replacement. Just like right now, if you want to eat something sweet in the United States, you're almost assured that it's made out of high fructose corn syrup. That's just become the standard product that's used for many reasons, and we're not going to get into that. That's another 2-hour discussion. It's also what's happened with folic. So I would just say stop thinking about folic and get some folate and B6. Give me 1 second if you don't mind, guys, because somebody is at the door and I'm home alone. I'm just going to open it for them and come right back.
Thank you for your patience, everybody. Please do put your questions in the Q&A box. We will be closing the Q&A box in 20 minutes so that he can get through all of the questions. So if you have one, please put it in there now.
Hi, guys. Sorry about that. Somebody was banging on the door and I'm home alone. So, okay, what supplements do you recommend for nitric oxide? My favorite one, it's actually sitting right next to me. A lot of them don't work that well because the nitric oxide actually leaves the product. So it's kind of like it evaporates. It's this weird phenomenon. It's called, and this is not a commercial for them, I just personally use this product, N101. Look up Dr. Nathan Bryan. Look up Dr. Nathan Bryan, look at his research, a lot of amazing research on nitric oxide. And you can even just learn there, right? But that's what I recommend. Okay, after one is taken, this is from Mary, taking the toxins out of their environment and diet for a while to become more sensitive to exposures. Yes. So what happens when you get into good health, you become more sensitive to the bad. When you're bad metabolic health, when you're inflamed, you're just used to feeling that way, right? So you have this overall malaise in your body. And you're not sensitive to the threats. When you finally experience what good health feels like, then the signals and triggers that are inflammatory are so much more obvious. So this delta value between I feel good and I feel bad becomes more clear. So you just felt so bad before you didn't know. And this is a common phenomenon we see. It's not that you're more sensitive, it's that you're more cognizant and you're feeling so good that it's so obvious that when the bad happens. It's a very consistent, and that's a great blessing because it allows you to follow up on your good habits. So Claudette's asking, would you consider the lifestyle supplements, environment exposures, epigenetics aspect? Yes, I know that genes are a blueprint to lifestyle. Yes, exactly. Your genes are telling you, here's the job that your body doesn't do, suboptimal biological process. Now here's the habits. By the way, you weren't born sick, right? So here's the habits where if you were to adopt them are going to make you feel bad. And here's the habits that are going to make you feel good. Here's the threat, cardiovascular disease. To not get that problem, here's what you do. To get that problem, here's what you do. It's exactly like you said. The genome on its own does not cause the problem. The genome on its own causes the priority and the risk. Your habits layered on top of it equal the problem. So that's what we're trying to do here today is here's a red flag. Here's then the priority in terms of habits. Valerie said 64F. I'm not sure what you mean by that, unless you're on a flight and giving us your seat number. I wish I was with you, but if you can explain more, I will answer. Julia, for those of us who are poor methylation genes, can you methylate? Yeah, methylation optimizer will help, certainly. Again, you may only need B12, you may only need folinic acid. They're easy to get. But the overall methyl support formula can help with overall methylation. Sanjeev is asking, can you take too much folinic acid and it don't? Yeah, if you take a lot, we get B12 from meat and eggs. So the challenge with getting it from meat and eggs is if you don't have the efficient FUT2 gene, you don't actually metabolize it in your gut so efficiently, which is why you need sublingual. So some of our ancestors ate more goat and sheep and lamb, where it's a pre-methylated version that's actually sublingually absorbed. This is why you have to chew your food properly, because you're actually absorbing micronutrients while you chew. So it's not necessarily the case for anyone, but if you do take too much, yeah, it can make you feel off. But this is why formulations are formulated to give you the right amount. And no, we don't always get it from meat and eggs, which is exactly what we're trying to supplement and support here. Adrian's asking which genes most impact the ability to remove toxins. So we talked about that. It's a glutathione pathway, GSTT1, which be probably the most important one to look at. It's the SOD2 antioxidative pathway, not in the actual mechanism of removing the toxins, but giving your cells the resilience of the mitochondrial function to allow that removal to happen. So if you don't have efficient cells, you're already down 1 point, and now the detox is even more burdensome. So those are the areas you're looking. Sanjeev, my MTR is AG, and AG is first. So yeah, so you're again more adenosine B12 and folinic acid is where you're leaning towards. Valerie's asking with limited okay, so she's a skin issue. No medications other than V. It could again be so again, medical advice, difficult. We do have answers. I'm not not allowed to give them individually when it comes to a condition like this, unless you're intaken as a patient. But what we have seen is that this spike protein from the V is is inflammatory in nature. Now, how you deal with it is variable based on your genetics, and we've been talking about all of that today. And how you respond to it and fix it is also variable. It's not the same answer for everyone. So the way you're feeling could very likely be an outcome of that. And now the solution isn't to mask the symptom, but it is to support the system. How do you support it? I would, again, in your case, I just answered a bunch of questions, but in your case, I would say work with a clinician. Tracy just mentioned that Dr. Burkle is a derm specialist, so he can probably help you connect and we'll set you up there. The reason why I recommend this is because taking this back to your doctor, they're still going to think of it symptomatically. They just don't have the tools. Their toolkit doesn't look like this, right? So that's why there's certain people where I'm saying, talk to our intake coaches and talk to a clinician, because I think you need it. Suboptimal vitamin D. So I think you're saying you don't take, but I think you meant you do take. So you may consider splitting it. So when it comes to vitamin D, we talked about that last week. There's the first gene, which is how efficiently do I metabolize, which will speak to dosage. Then there's the transport and binding. So you may have a transport and binding problem, which means that you want to split the dose and take 2 or 3 doses a day. You're not going to go past 3 p.m. because it's going to disrupt your sleep, but try taking a couple doses. If that's not working, then try taking 3 doses. The same amount, but just splitting it into smaller doses so it can get to the cell. Okay, so you got your ApoE3 there. Zachary saying my bowel age is 7 years younger. So bad cholesterol isn't necessarily a sign of bad health. I can tell you, just today we put up an Instagram post saying that the Swedish people have the highest life expectancy in Europe. The Swedish people also have the highest cholesterol numbers in Europe because they eat fatty foods. They eat fondue and cheese and chocolate and all this fat. It's not a sign of bad health. This is where we've been misled. It's a sign of cholesterol, which is a precursor to a lot of great hormones. It's also a repair tool for inflammation. So there's 2 ways to look at this. Either you have inflammation, which I don't think you do because you're 7 years younger than your age, or you're just doing things right in terms of diet, right? And you maybe don't have, let's say, refined foods and processed foods, etc., and you have high cholesterol numbers. There's nothing wrong. Now, if you want an opinion, talk to a clinician, talk to a doctor about a holistic answer, like all of your habits and everything that you're doing. Maybe there's something that it's difficult to see in 30 seconds. But it's not necessarily bad news. In fact, it may be good news. Danelle, what's the best water to drink? I think you need to get a reverse osmosis filter to remove everything from your water. And then you need to get a tool to structure it. We work with a company called Somavedic. Team, I'm not sure if we have a discount code of any sort with Somavedic. So there's two things. Reverse osmosis allows you to clean everything out of the water. It's only H2O, but then you have no minerals, right? So two answers here. Reverse osmosis, you need to add minerals. Beam Minerals is the best we've seen out there. Amazing product. We may have a discount code. If we do, we'll share it with you. Then Somavedic allows you to structure your water. What does that mean? Picture a snowflake and picture a perfect snowflake. And then picture a snowflake that's kind of broken and mangled up. That's structure. The water molecule of the perfect snowflake is structured. The water molecule of the broken snowflake is not structured. The actual molecule is broken apart. So there's ways using EMF that can structure your water, which means it gets into the cell. So those are the sort of three parts of the answer. So Somavedic, we actually do have a discount code. That's great. So look at it. It's not, I mean, we're talking about a device that is pricey. It's in the $1,000 range, but it knocks out all of the EMF in your home. So the Wi-Fi and cell phones that are making you sick, it suppresses that and it structures your water to make it healthy. And there's your Beam Minerals code. Adrian's asking any thoughts on supplementing. Yeah, so NAD, NMN are great for cellular health. They're not the only answer. They work. They're getting a lot of attention because of the nature of people who's behind them. So David Sinclair and his voice. But there's many things you can do. It's one of many things, and it works. I agree that it works. Maria, Quicksilver Scientific has a sublingual liquid methyl product. Amazing. Thank you for that. Answering, I think it was Sanjeev's question. Melissa, ApoE24. So her mother had Alzheimer's. Can you explain a bit more? Yeah, so they do somewhat cancel each other out. So, and there's this unique phenomenon where a gene doesn't stand alone. There's all these instructions and even instructions to turn another instruction off, right? So you all of a sudden end up with this like 3-3 in the middle, even though you don't have those numbers. So really it's one gene turning another gene off, which is managing the expression. And so you end up in this place where some clinician sees a 4 and tells you it's bad news, but it's actually not, right? So it's as simple as what you already said, one gene turning another gene off. Mary, have you ever known someone with a muscular dystrophy be able to change a gene that's malfunctioning? So that is a genetic condition. That's not a chronic condition. That means you have it. You didn't cause it. That means that it's innate. That means we need a genetic therapeutic. There's a gold rush right now with a lot of pharma companies working on genetic therapeutics to treat genetic conditions that are a tiny fraction of their healthcare problem, but they're highly impactful in terms of what they do because you can't really treat them. So the short answer is there's no solution that is effective today, but there will be soon. I believe by around 2028-ish, you're going to see most genetic conditions are being resolved by genetic therapeutics. By 2030, they'll all be resolved. That's my belief. Mary, have you ever known someone about, oh, sorry, we just answered that. Julia, how does our doctor request a part of our report that we do not have access to? So there's a tab.
Sorry, but his internet is frozen again. Stand by, please.
Oh, sorry, guys. I'm going to switch Wi-Fi. Discuss what our children's genetics are based on. Yeah, so mom has these genes, dad has these genes. So yes, there are 4 possible deliverables, right? So it's just mom and dad passing it on. And there's this lottery of here's the 4 possibilities, and they could all be the same. Maybe it's GG here, GG here. So they're guaranteed to be GG. It'll be AG and A or AA, GG. So whatever it is, you're drawing on these two, putting them together. Now, that's not the only answer, because there's some other subtle nuances where even there's GG, GG all the way across, somehow they ended up with an A. There's other forms of mutation, seldom, but they also happen. But the basic science is that. Is there a chewable form of folinic acid? I have not seen that. I have not seen a chewable. No, with children, when there's a challenge, you often can pop a capsule and drop it in a smoothie, but I have not seen a chewable. It probably exists. I personally haven't seen it. So CYP2R, AG, blood tests. So AN, VDR, VDC. Okay. So first of all, in terms of overdose, what you can do is add K2, right? And there's a certain level where you're not really worried about the overdose. This again, slightly complex, right? Where you might consider working with a coach or a clinician, especially if your numbers aren't adding up to your habits. But I would say if you want to up the dose, add K2 and split it. And maybe even just try splitting before you try updosing, and that may resolve the problem on its own. So those are my answers. Take a look at that. Query GSTP T12, GSTP GG, precursors. Yes, we do have a supplement called Detox Optimizer that puts most of those into one formula. I would say because you do have 2 copies of GSTT1, you can take a liposomal glutathione. I would just start low and build it up because your GSTP1 is not the best. Non-GMO sunflower lecithin, yeah, I would be concerned. It's not a major, it's not like like a seed oil per se, but we're just finding more and more and more that all these plant-based extracts and flower-based extracts are not, even just the processing, the way they heat them, it degrades the compound and turns it into a poison. So supplements come from collagen peptides, okay, fill it with antioxidant detox requirements. There is a difference between a collagen peptide and a supplement. A peptide is more potent than a supplement. It's borderline drug, right? These are really driving a very different outcome. These are driving sort of outward. Resveratrol, yes, cellular health. Hydraulic acid, collagen peptide are more about outward health, anti-aging. They're not so much about cellular resilience. So I would say you can combine the supplements with what you're doing, because they're kind of doing different things, although you may not need the resveratrol anymore. Danelle is asking, do you have an opinion on urotherapy? Urine therapy, I'm not familiar. Maybe if you provide some details. Danelle, do you have an experience report with DNA knowing why? Type 1 diabetes, this is again a genetic condition. Nobody knows a way to reverse it. Type 2 is preventable and reversible. Type 1 is innate. So a genetic condition you have, again, a smaller percentage of the problems we deal with, but they're bigger problems because they're not reversible. So we do not know a way, and I don't think any clinician knows a way right now to reverse type 1 diabetes. Maria, don't understand my GST1 NA wavelength 2. Yeah, so that's exactly what we're saying. You have 2 copies, Maria. You have both copies of the GSTT1 gene, which is good news. You're a really good detoxifier. Your glutathione is being driven really well. So that's good news. You have 2 copies. That's what it means. We have another question here. FUT2 AG, I'm a full-time vegan, rejected when I was a baby. What should I take for life? So here's the challenge. You do not thrive as a vegan. The FUT2 is the gene that makes the enzymes to break down most of your vegan proteins, and you don't have the good version. So there's two considerations for you. You're either getting other sources of protein that are not your typical vegan sources, or you're adding digestive enzymes because you're not doing that innately yourself. And this is over time going to cause ruckus in your gut, which you don't want, which is going to lead to other things like leaky gut, Crohn's, colitis, all of the gut inflammatory issues. And Julia is asking the same question. AG is not the best. So if you're AA, great. If you're AG or GG, you're not doing so well with the enzyme for a lot of the vegan foods. Even not the protein, but even like kales and some of the carnivorous greens, it's still a problem, right? So you're either changing your diet and getting your proteins elsewhere, or you're adding digestive enzymes, which is going to be a game of trial and error to see when you feel good. And this is going to express problems in other areas where you may not realize it's tied to that vegan diet. Could affect your hormones, could affect your brain and migraines and cognitive function. Because keep in mind, if you get your gut into a dysbiotic state, you lead yourself to gut wall permeability, which then leads yourself to leaky gut, which then means toxic substrates directly entering the bloodstream, crossing the blood-brain barrier, leading to leaky brain. So there's so many other things that can come out of this. It's important to focus on it. So to Julia and the last gentleman who I think left now, you're changing your diet or you're adding enzymes and really heavily focusing on what feels right. Maria's asking, my GSTP1 is GG, GSTM1 is yeah, so 3 different functions. Again, GSTP1, GG, and GSTT1, 2. GSTT1 means that you're doing a good job of clearing, but both your first line defenses are broken. So it's getting in, but you're doing a bad job of clearing. So you still need to support it, I would say. But the second line of defense, which is almost the most important, is doing a good job. So keep supporting that. Like you said, liposomal glutathione, start low and build it up. Sheng is asking if we have time, can you go over high cholesterol again? I didn't catch what you're saying. Okay. Your arteries are of variable quality based on the 9p21. The more G's, the worse it is. 3-4 is the average, but that's still not good. 2-1-0 is very rare and less of a concern. This is why cardiovascular disease is so prolific, because most of us don't have good hardware. It's not the norm. Bad hardware. Now, based on your input pathways, glutathione, oxidation, hormones, something is causing inflammation to your arteries and you have bad quality hardware, so you're getting inflammation quickly. Now your body will deploy cholesterol as a solution to the inflammation. It goes to fix the inflammation. Now that cholesterol meets the toxin that caused the inflammation to begin with, and it oxidizes and hardens itself. And that's the beginning of that cholesterolemia. Now, whether you are a good statin metabolizer and you're medicated or not, or whether you're a good PCSK9 metabolizer, expressor, and you deal with the receptor sites well, if you're medicating it, those are the two things to look at, but you can deal with it without medicating it by getting rid of the inflammation. Let's just not have the inflammation, right? So that's how we think about it. Melissa, I'm missing all copies of GST, T1, TM1. Is glutathione supplement still helpful? No, so do not take glutathione, take the precursors. But again, I mentioned this in the beginning. Those of you that have big red flags in your glutathione pathway and your antioxidant pathway, or both, highly, highly, highly recommend you work with a coach. Highly recommend you speak to a functional genomics practitioner. This is where all your problems are going to come from. This is that central hub where aging will come from, where cancer will come from, where cardiovascular disease will come from, where dementia will come from. If you're seeing big red flags in these systems, and if you're seeing big red flags in both, even more important, it's almost a must. You need to work with someone, because there's unless I'm privately having this conversation with you and going through your genome, which essentially is part of the program, there's no way to give you enough of an answer. It's complex. It's very complex. There's a lot going on in your body. And this is why Medicine hasn't solved chronic disease. This is why there's so much proliferation of chronic disease, because the way we get there is complex. The good news is we've unpacked this complexity. We've made this complexity very simple. We now know why these conditions happen. And because we know why they happen, we can reverse them and we can prevent them. But we also know if you do nothing about it, the path to getting them is very, very certain. It's very easy to get there, especially in today's context where everything is a threat. And this is why I press upon you that if you feel like you're in one of these profiles, which I keep seeing so many people saying, glutathione pathway is broken, antioxidant pathway is broken, both are broken, methylation is broken. This is where major problems will come from. Work with a functional genomics coach, make this investment into 66% of American personal bankruptcies are based on the healthcare costs, where you're spending your life savings at the end of your life to stay alive for the disease that was caused that could have been prevented with a few months of work. But I don't know where a better way to invest your time. So highly recommend you work with somebody. Okay, if my blood test shows normal range of micronutrients, then bindable show, yeah, so your habits are aligned. So yeah, so if the blood work is showing you're good, this is more of a question. If your blood work is showing something is bad, then why? What do I do about it, right? If it's good, there's nothing to do. But if it's showing as bad, then we would have said, well, here's what to do about it. But you're already in the clear. Sanjeev's asking what's the best time to take B12 in the morning. Yes, do not take it in the afternoon. It'll screw up your sleep. Take it in the morning. B12 doesn't really matter. I know that our methyl formula, we say to take it with food, but the actual B12 itself doesn't really matter. Cheng's asking for 4G is not good. So this is what we're saying, Cheng. So for you, you have a minus 70% ability to deal with inflammation in the endothelial. So now why is this going to happen? What's going to trigger all these problems? That's where you want to work with a coach. I'll have to take antibiotics for jock itch, but reports say microbiome is vulnerable and needs protection other than yeah, so it's more the replenishment. So you have to go through the antibiotics, let that pass. Don't do anything during that time. Go through it. After you're done with the antibiotics, then you need to replenish the gut flora. And that looks like a product called Megaspore. If you're, we can probably share this, by the way, I think we have a code for them. If you're going through this, you want to replenish the gut microbiome, you want to repair the gut walls, and you want to work with digestive enzymes for some time to support your gut. By the way, we did announce this in the beginning, and I have to repeat it here, even though I've already responded, just due to, what we're speaking about, clinical information and the obligations and responsibilities around that. We cannot answer questions from anyone that is anonymous. And your questions have been anonymous. I have answered them, but please change your settings to provide your name. It's just important in terms of the regulations around healthcare, and there are a lot of them. I don't want to slam the textbook here and show you, so where you would spend the next year trying to read them, but it's important. So there's your code for BioOptimizers. Use the code DNACO, you'll get a discount. So step one, again, like we said, replenish that the flora, repair the gut, and then add enzymes. Is there a genetic component to BPH? Are you talking about blood pressure? Brad, if you don't mind answering that. Mary, at what age would you recommend getting someone? As soon as they can spit. I've done all my kids. I now discipline them differently. I know what they need to eat. I know my 6-year-old daughter who wants to be a gymnast is actually designed for it hormonally. She won't fail. She'll thrive. I'm not going to waste her time putting into something that's not good for her. I know my 14-year-old son and how he thinks and how to actually come to him where he'll succeed, as opposed to burdening him with tasks and discipline that aren't what his brain is wired for. So here's your DNA. It's your human instruction manual. At every phase in your life, there's questions you're asking, and there's problems you're solving that you could potentially solve at the personalized level if you had your DNA. A young girl who's not knowing what courses she should take or what food she should eat. An adolescent girl who is trying to understand her puberty and menstrual cycle, and a mature woman who's trying to understand fertility and all of that, what comes along with that, a mature woman who's now getting into menopause, a senior woman who's now dealing with bone health, brain health. So it's the same data that you keep going back to answer new questions. And even within those buckets, it's like, this month I'm at home. This month I want to go on vacation and climb a mountain. There's different things I need to do to prep for that, right? So at any age, and the earlier you start, the bigger the gift is to you, right? Gifting this to your children, giving them their human instruction manual, and providing them access to the inner workings of their body so they do not have to go through trial and error. I don't know what better gift there is, you know. Again, this is why all my kids have been tested, my niece, my friends' kids. This is the gift that I give when I'm around somebody, because I don't know what better gift there is to give than to know exactly how your body works and always make the right choice. And the earlier you start at prevention, the more effective you're going to be at preventing disease and not having it. I would argue that give me a 5-year-old kid and I will give you your genetic playbook to never be sick and live the optimal life, mentally, physically, spiritually, metabolically, all of those, right? Okay, so it looks like we've been through all the questions. I want to make sure that we did not miss anything. I'll just quickly scan through the chat. Okay, so the Q&A has now been officially closed, just to make sure that we gave everybody a chance and time that they needed. So the intention today was to teach you how to rethink chronic disease and aging, that they are not siloed problems, that they are one and the same, that if you are aging rapidly, that you probably are also wired for chronic disease. If you look at the physical structure of DNA, it looks like it is designed to last 120 years. And why do I say that? There's these caps on the end of your DNA called telomeres, which are their bumpers that are like the shock absorbers for all of the DNA damage that happens. And we actually use those to predict biological age, because based on the amount of damage, we kind of figured how many years you've taken off your life. And that's based on a 120-year clock. So if we know science is already saying that, we know you're wired to live up to 120. Any years below that were the choices you made to chip years away. So what you should be able to do is live in good health, dancing at your great-great-grandchildren's wedding at the age of 120, and then dying of old age. That's what should happen. Instead, we get a chronic disease at 55, less than half of that age, and we maintain that poor health, and then we die in our 70s. The average American now dies at 78. That, for the first time in history, we saw drop by 3 years. The American life expectancy dropped by 3 years. A few months would have been a red flag. It dropped by 3 years this year for the first time ever. That's how sick we are. So now the choices we make got us there. This is why even the age dropped by 3 years, because the things we're doing and the things we're exposed to, there's some things that are forced upon us that's taking our life away. But it's now, again, like I said earlier, the context has changed. So your thinking has to change. What is important to you? What do you prioritize? What do you supplement with? What do you eat? What do you bring into your home? What do you expose yourself out to? Who do you expose yourself to? All of those questions need different answers now. Reality has changed. And so the choice between aging, disease, longevity, etc., all of that has changed. So hold on to what you learned here today as a tool, not a simple lesson. It's a reoccurring constant tool. It's a new set of goggles you're wearing, and you see the world through that lens so that you can hold on to that vitality you had when you're 25, and you can continue. And if you feel like this is overwhelming, or if you feel like there's a problem, or if you feel like there's too many red flags in your DNA, this is exactly what coaching is for. This is exactly what experts are for. This is exactly what educated medical doctors, naturopaths, personal trainers, nutritionists, dietitians are for. They have the knowledge to support you through this journey and give you the exact program. Here's what we need to do for the next 90 days to give you an extra 15 years of life. Here's what we need to do for the next 90 days to make sure that the Alzheimer's that we see in your genome never happens. Here's what we need to do for the next 90 days to take you and your diabetic label, which you now have diagnosed, and remove that label. You don't have it anymore. Right? This is why it becomes so important. There's so much more value you can derive out of this valuable data you now have in your hand. Again, here we're talking about an optimization level. How do we work together to give you the information, teach you how to fish as opposed to give you a fish? You can keep using this in different contexts and different questions you have to ask. But there is a deep dive you can go through. And I think Tracy just dropped in here, our team that can help support you and give you that genetic playbook. Tell me exactly what I need to do to be the best version of myself and have experience a maximum number of years in the best possible quality of health that my body is capable of. Teach me that. And in 30 to 90 days, we can figure that out depending how deep you want to go. And then all of a sudden you become that best version of yourself. So that's what I wanted to leave you with, because I know that today's session was a little heavier, right, than the other sessions, because we're talking about disease, we're talking about the big fears we have, we're talking about what we know mom and dad had that we don't want to get, right? But the message to you is all of it is preventable. If you weren't born with it, you don't have it, and you don't have to. It is caused. Your choices cause it. The reasons it's caused for us is different. You've taken step one. You now know how your body works. Step 2 and 3 are now implementing, whether you're doing that on your own or you're working with a coach to build you that personalized plan and fast track and shortcut it. Either way, just do it. Either way, whether you're going to do it on your own, you're going to work on your coach, the important thing is that you do it. Don't leave it at, I got my report, I listened and I learned, I got educated. Now do the work. Do the work, because you've now been armed with something that the majority of the world has never experienced. You're in a very privileged bucket of very few people, a tiny fraction of this world's population that has this information. Now do something with it. Do something with it, change your life, give yourself that extra decade, give yourself that health span versus lifespan, quality of life, experience what it means to be a centenarian, 100 years old plus, riding your bicycle on holiday as opposed to sick. Do it, because we know we can. And to Tracy's point, if you want more direction, the DNAging test, email Amy. We will look at the insides. We'll look at your genetic expression and try and get a gauge of where you're at. It also looks at your immunity and some things around nutrition. So there's additional data beyond the genetic testing report. So if you're wanting to know more about the inner workings of your body, connect with Amy, whose name we just dropped in there, and she'll tell you how we can get you. You'll be one of the first people in the world to go through DNAging. So with that, I thank you for joining us. I hope this was valuable. Implement. One word I can tell you: implement. Do not stop at what we learned here today. Whether you're doing it yourself or whether you're doing it with a coach, implement. Build that plan. This next 90 days is the choice between what's going to happen anyway or a very different outcome. Good evening, guys. Thank you again. Good seeing you.
Thank you all very much. Julius, stop the recording, please. Kashif, thank you. Have a great night, everybody.